What's up, storytellers? I'm Clark R. Rowanson, the Magic Engineer, and it's time to talk about magic. You may or may not know this, depending on how long you've been around on the channel or whether you've met me in person, but I really love tabletop RPG games. They are so amazing, and they allow for certain levels of creativity and story development and collaborative storytelling that you can't really get any other way. And I have been looking for a while for ways that I can bring that together with the magic systems. And that's where this video comes in, because I want to talk about what I think is the best tabletop RPG for using homebrew magic systems. And before we get into that, there's a number of things that I want to cover, including why you might want to do homebrew content, what I consider when I'm looking at what makes it the best system for homebrew magic systems. But, first and foremost is the question of why should you have magic in a tabletop RPG? Well, all of the reasons you should have magic in a novel or any other kind of story. It's awesome. And it's there to enhance all of the other parts of the story. It can really build into the character background, the character growth, the story arc, and yada, yada, yada. You can find me talking about why magic is so awesome in some of my other videos. So anything that applies there, just understand that it applies to this format of storytelling as well. As I already said, we are going to dig into why you might want to do homebrew content, what kind of stuff makes a tabletop RPG friendly to homebrew content, why D&D and some other systems don't work for me personally, and as the title indicates, I'm going to talk about which one I think is the best, and that is which one is best for me. And at the very end, we're actually going to look at how you can build a homebrew magic system for this tabletop RPG, because it is so simple, and I'm really excited to get into that. Before we do, I just want to be absolutely clear. All of this is my opinion, and I'm not slamming or disregarding or putting down any of the other systems that I mentioned. Every tabletop RPG system has its own strengths and weaknesses and is going to work better for different types of players and different types of stories. But why would we want to do homebrew content? Well, first off, if you are a GM, you have probably already made and used homebrew content. Homebrew content just refers to anything that isn't pulled directly out of the source material. So if you have a monster that isn't in the monster manual, or you have a class that isn't in the player's handbook, it's something that you created yourself or you worked with your players to create, that's homebrew content. And a lot of times the world building is homebrew content, but generally we're talking more about the homebrew rules and content to the system rather than just to the world. Now, why would you want to do this? Well, I said before that every system has its own strengths and weaknesses, and every system, depending on the genre that they're connected to, is going to have gaps and weak points that maybe you want to shore up. Maybe you want to have a D&D game where your characters are dealing with lots of addiction and substance abuse, and you need to generate some kind of addiction rule set to manage how that's going to affect their character stats. I'm sure you can find something in Unearthed Arcana or somewhere else, but you want to make something that works for you and your players. Homebrew content. Maybe you want a very particular play style. So developing specific play styles and supporting specific types of behavior is another reason you do homebrew. Like if there's a gap in the rule about sailing ships, or you want to get more detailed about crafting homes or something like that, you may need to develop your own set of rules around how you want that to work. And when it comes to play styles, especially for characters, that can be incredibly personal and incredibly unique, and the way you flavor things can matter a great deal. So again, maybe you're playing D&D. One of the problems I often run into is I really want to do a melee, a frontline magic user. And I have never really been satisfied with the options that are available. Paladins don't use magic enough. The battle wizards and some of the other ones that are available are a bit too squishy. And I personally would end up making a custom class so that I could have that frontline battle mage. No, they're not as powerful as a wizard. And no, they can't use weapons like a warrior, but they can fit into that niche. And that's something that I personally haven't been fully satisfied with in the core D&D classes. But it's not just about me. Maybe you want to do a defender class that uses magic force fields as their reactions to guard people across the battlefield. Or you want to do a very specific type of flame assassin, or you want somebody who navigates through water instead of through darkness. And you just want to change up a bit of how this works here, a little bit of how that works there. You want to do an avatar character who has just elemental powers, and it's really focused in on that. All of that is kind of stuff that you might need to tweak and develop to really get that unique playstyle that you're really after. When you're making homebrew content, you can also make it incredibly personalized. You can make it into the perfect match for you as the game master, for your players, for your player group, for the tones and attitudes that this group is going for in this adventure, the story arc, the setting. It gives you more control to massage and shape things into precisely what you want them to be so they work flawlessly. For example, Mage the Awakening is designed to be in kind of a modern day setting. And with some tweaking though, maybe you want to put it in more of a steampunk setting, or you want to move it into some gothic horror, and building those homebrew rules and adjustments are going to allow you to massage it and personalize it into exactly the thing that you want and need it to be. One thing that is incredibly important to me when it comes to my games, the games that I run and the games that I play in, I can't really tell you why, but I highly value a sense of ownership to the game, especially in the games that I'm running. I really like to feel like it is my creation. It doesn't necessarily have to extend into the story, but especially when I'm dealing with monsters and NPCs and cities and some of the quirks of how things work, I really want it to feel like it's my own. It's something I'm working on because that's not usually feasible, because that takes a lot more time. That takes a lot more time than just simply reskinning something, which is just splashing on a different coat of paint, changing a little bit of how it works here and there, minor tweaks. A lot of times I'm not as satisfied with that. So if you're like me and you really want that sense of ownership, homebrew content is kind of where you have to go to do that if you don't want to build an entire system from scratch. Okay, there's one more very important facet of homebrew content. And this homebrew content is invaluable if you have experienced players, especially if you have people who have been playing in the same system for decades, which does happen. Because at that point, they know every monster stat block, they know every spell, and they know every class. So doing homebrew content is a way for you to create things that are fresh, exciting, and unexpected. So they know the stat blocks of a Behir, and they know how its lightning breath recharges. They know the exact range on that lightning breath. So if you do some reskinning and some homebrew content, you change it up so it's not a Behir anymore. It's some kind of massive dog. And not only that, instead of just doing lightning breath, it's actually exhaling massive storm clouds that are electrically charged. So it's a combination of lightning and the kill cloud spell. They're not going to be ready for that. Even if you throw that spell specifically onto the Behir and just change up how they function, it's a great way to surprise people, make things new and interesting again, and just keep everybody excited in the game. It's pretty great. So what is it that makes a tabletop RPG friendly to homebrew content, specifically friendly to homebrew magic systems? Well, I think it really comes down to three main things. One is the innate complexity of the game system. Then you have the innate power balance within the game system. And last, you have how clear and how developed the structure and patterns of the magic system, of the inherent magic system, are. So let's look at those a little deeper one at a time. The first one is pretty straightforward. We're talking about the complexity of the core rules. The more complex the core system is, the more things you have to consider, pay attention to, weigh, balance, and account for while you're doing your homebrew content. D&D actually, I think, strikes a nice middle ground here, where there's enough rules that you have a solid base that you can build things in, but there's not so many facets that if you forget a piece, people are going to be floundering. Like Shadowrun is pretty notorious for having rules and mechanics for like everything. And so if you're trying to build homebrew content that factors in and plugs into all of those different rule sets, that can be a bit overwhelming. The core rule complexity is especially important if the game system has special rules just for the magic system. Mage the Awakening is kind of an example of that. There's the core rules about how characters work and how their growth works, and then there's tons and tons of stuff about how the magic works. You're dealing with vulgarity and paradoxes and all kinds of stuff that doesn't exist outside the use of magic. Kind of makes sense because that aspect of the World of Darkness, White Wolf games, now Onyx Path, I think, that's the focus of that little subgenre. So it kind of makes sense there. But when you're looking at a system that has a bunch of specific and intricate rules just for the magic, it becomes more difficult to put your homebrew magic into that system. So it's something to bear in mind. The second factor I mentioned is the innate power balance within the system. Anytime you're dealing with magic, progression fantasy, and games of any kind, power balance becomes very important. And that is a combination of power balance between the level of the character and the quests you're putting them up against, as well as the level of the character and the skills and equipment that they're unlocking, also compared to their opposition. It is also a factor when you are trying to compare different classes and different play styles. And this is where a lot of tabletop RPGs struggle. And no judgment here. It's hard. It's really tricky to get that balance right. And D&D is no exception to this. I think they really struggle with the power balance between magical characters and non-magical characters. Because the non-magical characters start very weak and then become extreme powerhouses that are able to do extraordinary and world-shaping things with individual spells. And your melee and physical damage-based characters start strong and end up lagging behind, not always, but often end up lagging behind as you move through the campaign. And you could argue that that's intentional so that that end game is part of the payoff of playing a magic-based character. It's still kind of a frustration that can make things a little difficult. And I bring this up here because, again, when we do homebrew content, it is connected into the core system. So if there's some innate power balance issues in the core system, you're going to have similar struggles keeping a power balance in anything new you add. So the more balance there is inherently, generally the easier it will be for you to ensure that your own magic system, your own additions to the magic system, are also balanced, assuming the structure of the magic is clear, which is the next point we're talking about. When a tabletop RPG has a clear structure to their magic system, it's much easier to build your own content off of it. And from there, it's easier for you to take advantage of the parts that are done well in the magic system, including any inherent balance they manage or anything like that. And what I'm talking about there is the clarity on the bits and pieces and how the individual magic works. Mage the Awakening is a very, very soft magic system, and very soft and fairly irrational magic system, because there are specific domains of influence. And when you want to perform a spell, as long as you can explain how it is part of the domain and you roll well enough, you can do it. Which makes adding your own custom spells and your own custom domains both, it seems very easy and intuitive, but trying to plug it in a way that takes advantage of it, you're kind of on your own. You basically just have to make it up on the spot. But that's how that game is built. All of it, you kind of have to make up on the spot. They have some recommended spells, but beyond that, there's a lot that you're just sort of improvising. And on the other hand, you have things like D&D, where the structure is more clear because we know we need to specify things like range, semantic components, verbal components, duration, damage, specifics about the effect, that kind of thing. Where D&D is less structured is what capabilities the different spell levels can have. If you dig into it, you can find patterns. Like you can start to see that, okay, level 1 spells are probably dealing between this amount of damage and this amount of damage, which means you're looking at like, I don't know, at like 3d6 to 2d10 or something like that. I don't know what those numbers are. I'm sure you can find those, but it's not inherently obvious. It's not an inherent structure. Each spell has its own rules and numbers, which means you have to balance and tweak each individual spell to make sure it's a match for other spells at that level. And that can be really hard and really cumbersome. So when you have systems with a clearer structure, it makes it easy for you to build your own extensions, depending on the type of person. This is an area where that makes it much easier for me because of the way my brain likes to analyze and build things. Okay, I got really revved up while recording this video. So this is a brief interruption that is being recorded and posted. Please do take a second to like and subscribe and consider joining me on Patreon. All of those things help immensely. Like, so much. So yeah, like, subscribe. Glad to have you here. Back to the content. Now that we have all of that out of the way, what is the best tabletop RPG for homebrew magic systems? It's Open Legend. Absolutely Open Legend. Granted, this is based on my own limited experience. I haven't played all of the game systems out there, and this is my own personal preference. But hear me out on this. Open Legend has some really cool mechanics that really make all of this work. Open Legend is an open source game system. You can go get the rules, all of the rules online right now for free. They do also have some campaign settings and some other stuff that you can buy, which I also thoroughly enjoy. But it's just, go check it out. If you take nothing else, go check out the site. There will be a link in the description below. In terms of complexity though, I feel that Open Legend is medium high in complexity. I think it's a little simpler than D&D because it doesn't have as many rules about all of these specific situations. They really tried to generalize stuff. And that's both the strength and the weakness of the system, because the main way they tried to work with it, and the weirdest part of this system is how your rolls work, your action rolls work. Because you start with a base d20, and then depending on your attribute score, you add additional dice into that dice pool. So if you have an attribute score of 3, you end up doing 1d20 plus 1d8, and then you total them together. If you have an attribute score of 5, you roll 1d20 plus 2d6, and you add all of them together. And on top of that, the dice can explode. So if you ever roll the maximum number on any of the dice, you get to roll them again, take that max, and add the new number in. So it gives a wide range, which sometimes I think is a little too wide, which I have my own special homebrew rules about the exploding dice, but that is not the point here. So that part is a little bit odd, but once you understand that and that sequence and that growth, I personally find the rest of the rules to be very intuitive. Not only that, the core rules have some very interesting mechanics that I think everybody should implement in all of their RPG games. I am not kidding. If you just read through the core rules and learn about the yes but, no and rules to help people fail forward, it will make your games better. I promise. Power balance is one of the areas I feel Open Legend truly excels. It doesn't matter if you do a magic character or a mundane melee or mundane damage character, or if you do some kind of blend. Whatever you want to do, all of the characters grow in the same way, they scale in the same way, and they work the same way, which does have its own pros and cons, but just inherently, it makes it so that there is automatically going to be balance no matter what you do. And that is fantastic, especially if we're wanting to do homebrew stuff, because then you don't have to worry about making sure your mages aren't overpowered as long as you don't tweak and change too many of the core rules, which is fantastic. And I'm going to take back what I just said, because yeah, I know I said that the power balance is where it shines the most, but it's not where it shines the most. It's the structure of the abilities and the magic. That is where Open Legend shines the most, especially when we're talking about homebrew content. Because check this out. Most game systems end up building out dozens or even hundreds of individualized, specially crafted and specially worded spells and abilities. Rather than doing that, Open Legend, which I think is just brilliant, and I'm sure there are other game systems that do this, but it blew me away when I first saw it. They focus on what is truly important, the results. So rather than wording things a specific way, every action roll has one of three things it can do. It can inflict damage, it can inflict a positive effect known as a boon, or it can inflict a negative effect known as a bane. There are feats that can allow you to start combining damage and banes together and start doing stuff as area effect and multi-targeting and so on. But again, that's part of the core rules. So by focusing on these effects, you end up with lists of outcomes rather than lists of specifically crafted details. And this is where the structure really comes into play, because every single boon and bane has a set of specific information that it is required to have, which makes, if you want to create your own, makes that much easier. So for example, you have the name, tells you what it's going to do, right? It gives you a general idea. Then you have the power level, which tells you a number of things. One, the power levels have increasing magnitude of effect, and some of them gain additional effects as you go up in power level. And the power level tells you how strong you need to be in your attributes to invoke or inflict that boon or bane. For example, if you're dealing with the heal boon, that can be activated from power levels 1 up to power level 9. But the max level you can achieve it at is dependent upon the attribute you activate it with. So if you are using creation and you have a creation of 5, that means the strongest heal you can do is a heal power level 5. And then there's the attributes. I just used creation as an example. Every single boon and bane also includes a list of possible invoking attributes, which I'm gonna say that again. Every boon and bane has a multitude of attributes that can inflict it and can create it. So that means blindness isn't just a spell limited to necromancy anymore. Blindness can be inflicted by entropy. It can be inflicted by alteration. It can be caused by agility or might. And this is where the openness of Open Legend comes in. I'm going to talk about this more in a second, but all of this stuff requires you and requires the players to add your own flavor. Because anytime you do something, you need to be able to explain how it works. So if I'm blinding a character with agility, how am I doing that? Am I doing a dagger slash at their eyes? Or am I doing a ranged smoke pellet or a blinding pellet that I'm hitting them right in the face and that's causing them to be blinded? Am I poisoning their body with entropy, which causes their eyes to stop working? Am I using alteration to congeal a mass of jelly across their eyes that they can't see through? You sort of have to match up your description and your functionality with the invoking attribute. But by having those pieces of information, it gives you massive flexibility and helps you structure things kind of on the fly and as you need. And then the last bits of information are the specifics of the effect. And that's where it's more like other spells that you see in like D&D and so on. Because at that point, you do need to explain what happens at each of the different power levels, but you very quickly get a feel for what kind of things people should be able to do at different levels. That I get super excited about that. I love how that structure works, and that's going to become more apparent why in just a couple minutes. The last reason that I think Open Legend is perfect for homebrew magic systems is it is built for homebrew content. It is literally built for it. It's what's known as a genre agnostic game system. So things like Powered by the Apocalypse are also another example of that. The game system is not tied to a specific genre or world. It's not specifically fantasy. It's not specifically noir or pulp fiction or sci-fi. It's just a set of core rules that you can apply anywhere in any way that you want, which is great because that level of flexibility is incredible. At the same time, like I said, it basically requires homebrew content. It doesn't inherently come with a world for you to deal with. It doesn't come for classes for your characters to build. They have to look at the perks and the flaws and the abilities and figure out their own path. And that can be overwhelming. And on top of that, even once you have your own path and you know what abilities you want, you have to build in your own flavor to explain how it is you're doing what you do. you want to build some kind of temporal guardian and you give them a heal ability, you need to explain how they're using time manipulation to heal themselves and their allies, which, depending on the type of person, that can be a real struggle. Me, I love that so much, but it's not for everyone. And when I have been playing with this game, I often work with my players to help them walk through what they want to do, build out possible lines of development, and help them understand the flavoring that they're going to do. And that has worked better. But what has worked best has been the full homebrew magic systems, which is what we're going to talk about right now. I'm not satisfied just telling you that Open Legend is a great tabletop RPG for homebrew magic systems. I want to show you. I want you to, in this video, able to go off, grab the rules, and build your own magic system into it. So let's do that right now. It's surprisingly simple. There's really only 4 steps. I kid you not, 4 steps. The first step is to identify the concept, the theme, or the play style of the magic or the class. Are you wanting to do an ice mage that lays down control effects and manipulates the battlefield? Is this supposed to be earth magic that is limited to large-scale effects and is not as practical in one-on-one, fast-paced combat? Are you wanting to do blood magic? Do you want to do necromancy? Are you doing a tinkerer that creates automatons that they send out into the battlefield and out into the world to do their bidding? Whatever you want to do, you need to understand that level of the system first. Because the game has the core mechanics ready for you, you need to know what flavor you're shooting for before you do anything else to generate your own magic system for Open Legend. But once you have that, you can move forward to step 2. For step 2, you take your concepts from step 1 and you identify any restrictions, requirements, and patterns that you know you want to have based on those concepts. For example, I said they do have a campaign setting that you can purchase. It's called Amaria's Dawn, and in there's a bunch of different types of singing magic. And they didn't necessarily do it in that content. I went in and added my own homebrew rules because they're singing. Well, you have to be singing. So it's impossible to perform magic while being silent. That's one of the requirements. It also makes it so that the range of effect is going to be limited to range of sound, which may sound really weird, but that's going to change depending on whether you're in buildings, out in the wilderness, out on just a stone plateau. Those were important concepts, important restrictions that I was building into stuff. It also meant that the silence bane was incredibly potent, because if you can silence your opponent, you've cut off their magic. Or let's say you want to do ice magic, and a requirement is that there has to be water available for them to perform the magic. It can be water in the air. It can be water that they carry with them. It can be water from the environment. It doesn't matter. They have to have water. Having those restrictions set up now will be important. And it's not really important to the rules. It's just things that you are adding on that you want to know going in. Because once you know how the magic is going to be shaped and a little bit of how it's manipulated and sort of what the inherent capabilities and weaknesses are to the magic, that's when you can move on to step 3. Step 3 is where it all comes together. Now that you have the concept and you have the basic idea of how it works and how it can't work, all you have to do is go through the list of boons and banes and hand pick the ones that you think can be performed by this magic. That's it. And as you go, you build out your definitions and your explanations of how it's going to work and why it works. And you're effectively building your own spells. And you now have a grimoire for this magic system that you can hand to your players. They don't have to do any flavor. They've got what they want. You have built the exact magic system you want, and it is fantastic. And there is just one more step that I got too excited and forgot to talk about. And that is step 4, where once you know the concept, once you know how it works, and once you have identified what exactly it can do, this is your chance to do any final tweaking that you need to do. Are there any custom rules that you need to build? Is there any kind of special interaction that you want to add? Are there any kind of special action rules, different interactions between the magic? This is where you're doing your final tweaking and your final polishing. And once you've got that, you're done. 4 steps for an entire magic system. It's crazy. So let's talk through an example. And I am shamelessly ripping this from my campaign that I played. One of my players had a very gross idea that was right up my alley, and we ended up going with it. He had a character who was kind of like a combination between the Blob and Sandman, where he just had massive folds. He had large amounts of extra flesh that he could shape and manipulate. And as we went through the campaign, that ended up connecting with and tying to some living armor, which enhanced his abilities. And that started turning into its whole own magic system, because with there started being inherent restrictions. I came up with some concepts that he could actually absorb matter from dead bodies to gain more mass so that he could do more things. And since the logic behind this was related to the amount of mass he had and the amount of mass his armor had, he was severely limited in range compared to the people who were doing his singing magic. So he could generally only reach with his stuff about 15 feet, which is way shorter than the 50, 75 feet that other people could manage with some of their effects. At the same time, he started getting more flexibility, and he got a cluster of different boons and banes that didn't necessarily make sense any other way. He could create barriers. He could increase his armor. He couldn't make himself move faster, but he could do kind of movement and telekinesis where it wasn't true telekinesis. He was reaching out with tendrils of flesh and armor to grasp things, lift them up, and pull them back. He could do forced move. He could bind things. He could slow them. And that's how we just went through and picked out a bunch of boons and banes. And in another game that I'm really wanting to run, I keep saying I'm going to run, it's based off of one of the episodes from World Build With Us, the Wuxia Tower. I wanted to go off the three types of magic are chi manipulation, radiance, and umbra. And so I just identified what those meant to me. And so chi manipulation, it's very martial arts heavy. The restrictions there are, with the exception of energy projection, all boons are only self-inflicted because you're manipulating your internal chi. You can inflict things externally and bursts of flame and negative effects that linger on a person, but improvements you could really only do to yourself. So that was one of the restrictions I built in. And then going through, I just picked out all the different boons and banes that I thought could apply. Doing haste, maybe teleportation, healing definitely, bolstering your attributes, stuff like that. And it takes so little time. It's crazy. I hope you are seeing the potential here. And I'm gonna bring myself down because I'm getting too excited. I can tell I'm getting too excited. But I hope you see why this is so crazy cool. Whew. All right. That was a lot of talking, and that was a lot of high energy nonsense from me. But at this point, we have talked about why you might want to create homebrew content, what I feel makes a tabletop RPG friendly to homebrew content, specifically homebrew magic systems. We talked about why I think Open Legend is the best game system I have seen for homebrew magic. And we walked through how you can do it yourself. And again, you can go get all of the rules online right now. So that's it for now. Thank you so much for being here. I need to do a better job of promoting myself. So I am going to say I provide writing and story coaching and help people with their magic systems all the time. You can find out more on sierrarowanson.com. You can contact me directly. Feel free to shoot me a message. You can follow me on Patreon and see more about what I talk about over there. There's a whole bunch of cool rewards I have there in terms of like free Q&As, you get access to polls, you get more of a determination in when these live Q&As happen. And as that community builds, there's more and more stuff that I'm wanting to do. Like I'm wanting to do some game sessions just with my patrons and stuff like that. I'm going to stop there because I'm already getting uncomfortable shilling myself this much. So thank you so much for being here. I hope you have found this interesting, and I hope you have found this helpful. And I hope you're going out and working on your own magic system right now. But whatever you're doing, I want you to make sure that you keep writing and you stay awesome.